Hey church family, welcome. Glad to have you joining me online as we continue our online services. For those of you that might just be tuning in for the first time, my name is Rex and I'm the pastor here at Ripon Grace. If you're joining us kind of in a transition moment in sermons. I say kind of. Last week we wrapped up Jonah, and one of the hearts for doing Jonah was to look beyond just the normal story of Jonah and the giant fish. Like, what's the bigger narrative? What's the bigger story? And we get exposed to the sovereignty of God. We get exposed to God's love for the lost. We get exposed to God's grace and how He extends grace to all the people in the story and how Jonah rebels against it. So we pushed past what we would see as the normal story, and inspiration kind of came out of that hey, let's look at some other incredibly familiar, incredibly traditional Old Testament Sunday school stories and go, what's the bigger story? What might we have gotten distracted from? And so with that in mind, we've decided to look at the book of Ruth. We're going to look at the book of Daniel, and we're going to look at the book of Esther, calling it my flannel graph sermon series. For those of you that are of the younger generation, you might have to Google flannel graph. I could have easily have called it my Veggie Tales sermon series, because Veggie Tales has done a fun job on each one of these stories. But the goal is to push beyond the Sunday school lesson and see what God has for us in there. So we're going to do Ruth starting today. And we're only going to do Act 1 of Ruth. I have just fallen in love with the story and even just the concept of these Old Testament stories. And so we're really going to look at this very much like a story. It's a true story, but it is told in a narrative way for us to gain something out of it. So we're going to look at what I'm calling is Act 1, which is also Chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. And what we're looking to see in it is this beautiful contrast between fullness and emptiness, and where that comes from and how that all ties together. Now, before we get into it, I want to address one question just right out of the gate, one that I even asked myself. Why Ruth? Why in this moment in time, with all that's going on in the world, coming out of surviving, coming back into the beginning of a normal life as COVID-19 is starting to turn the corner, and we're starting to open up. And in fact, we will be having, we're having services on Sunday here at church, and we're starting to see some of that loosen up. And there's been some fallout as it relates to COVID-19 with strong opinions one way or another and thoughts, and there's been some tensions. And then on top of that, just the absolute tragedy that took place with George Floyd, and then the massive fallout that's happened from that. When injustice takes place, it spurs the heart of man, and sometimes good can come out of it, and sometimes evil can come out of it, just as traditional as the heart of man is. And just all the craziness and just feeling like the world is, America is just struggling to catch its breath and get its feet. Why Ruth? I mean, it almost seems like I have no context with what's going on in society to do this seemingly juvenile, simple child story about a young widow, and how is this going to connect and apply to what the craziness, the chaos, the hurt, the pain, the struggle that is going on around the U.S. right now. Well, I'm going to give you some reasons. One of the things that we are absolutely going to see in the book of Ruth is beauty. And before you just dismiss beauty for the lack of depth or anything like that, the world that we are created in has tremendous beauty. Our Creator, our loving God, has given beauty and art inside our society, inside our life, to enrich and enhance our life. And the story of Ruth is a beautiful story. It's beautiful in its telling. It's beautiful in its finality and how it comes about and what happens inside the cave. It's one of the few stories where there's not this over-the-top protagonist. There's not this just real major negative influence. And there's just kind of a beauty to that. And the reality is, our world could use some more beauty in it right now. We're also going to see kindness. We're going to see kindness from a foreigner that is living in an unfamiliar country, in an unfamiliar society that looks and views the world differently, as Ruth shows kindness to Naomi, even in a covenant-style relationship that she commits fully to Naomi. And we're going to see kindness then also showered down upon Ruth, a foreign woman in a foreign land with nobody to look after and nobody to protect her. We're going to see kindness. Again, a simple concept, but our world could use it right now. We're going to see a rescue, and most importantly, we're going to see the gospel. We are going to see the beauty and the kindness and the rescue that is the gospel, the good news of Jesus, the rescue story. So we absolutely know that Ruth is a standalone story, but we go, it's part of a bigger story. It connects in the grand scope. Why is Jonah? Why is Ruth? Why is Esther? Why is Daniel a component of this? Is it's just a local narrative? How does it fit in the big picture? There is such beautiful foreshadowing and telling of the coming Christ, and we are going to see Boaz as a type of Christ. And so these realities, the need for beauty, the need for kindness, the need for a rescue, and the need for the gospel are as relevant, if not more so, today in the crazy of this world as it has ever been. So that's my why behind Ruth. Now, before we actually jump into the story, because we want to jump into the story, there's just a few foundational things that we want to talk about as it relates to reading and looking at an Old Testament story. First of all, the narrator. In this story, the narrator is God. It is a divine narrator, and the narrator plays a huge role in any story. Whenever I think of a narrator of a story, I absolutely go to The Princess Bride. Peter Falk is the perfect narrator. He's driving the story. He's telling the story. They cut in and out. I just always, when I think of narrator, it's like go-to, I hope this isn't a kissing movie, a kissing story. Like he does just a beautiful job. He's so well typecast there in telling this story. The book of Ruth is told from a divine narrator. And this is important because there's going to be times where the divine narrator just blows past something because that's not the point of the story. And there's going to be other times where the divine narrator focuses in on something because that's where we want to sink our teeth in. That's where we want to dig in. That's where we want to know. So God is the divine narrator inside this. Second of all, I want to avoid what I'm calling familiarity fatigue. What do I mean by familiarity fatigue? Pretty simple. It is a super familiar story. Like if you don't hear Ruth and think of Boaz and Kinsman Redeemer, then you haven't grown up in Sunday school. That's just default there. And what happens is we get so used to stories that we can tune them off, right? The most obvious example of this, you ever drive back and forth to the same place over and over and over again, whether that's work, whether it's girlfriend's house, whether it's school, the coffee shop, whatever it is, you make the same trip over and over and over. And at some point, you either park at where you're going or you park at home and you go, I don't even know how I got here. I don't even remember starting my car. I don't remember anything because you just fell in this rut and motor control took over, memory muscle took over, and the next thing you know, you're home or you're at the place. Don't get in familiarity fatigue as we look at this story. Keep a fresh eye, a fresh perspective, a fresh concept of a very familiar story. And then third, just a couple things that really help us understand Old Testament stories. There is a tendency inside any story to boo or cheer at different times. We want to boo when a character is doing something wrong, and we want to cheer when they're doing something right. It's natural, it's built in, it's wired, I get it. I'm going to just urge caution in this situation. We will see some characters and you go, why are they doing that? Or yay for them doing that. Booing and cheering at their immediate actions may detract from the overarching. We want to go, yay, Ruth went with Naomi back. Or boo, her sister-in-law didn't. Not the point of the whole story. So be careful about sucking down into those smaller concepts. Also, we want to be careful about not placing ourselves as the hero of the story. It's easy to do this, especially if you're a fan of fiction or movies or anything like that. If you read To Kill a Mockingbird, it's easy for you to become Atticus. If you watch Marvel movies, it's easy for you to become whatever Marvel movie character you're watching. If you are watching White Christmas, it's easy to become think of yourself as Bing Crosby or Danny Kaye. But what I say here is don't put yourself in mentally as the hero of this story. We are never the hero of a story. If we were in the Bible story, we would most likely either be the villain or the fool. We wouldn't be the hero. Not only that, Naomi's not the hero, Ruth isn't the hero, Boaz isn't the hero. God is the hero of this story. This is a rescue story, an overarching rescue story of God rescuing the people that he loves. But they are real live human characters, and you will feel a connection to them, and your heart may be pricked as you hear something or you read something or you see something. Allow the Holy Spirit to work inside that space. We also want to, in light with the booing and the cheering, we want to be careful not to get too focused in on one thing because we strip it down to moralism. If we value what Naomi does in one small situation, it becomes moralistic, and we should be more like Naomi, or we should be more like Ruth, or we should be more like Boaz. We want to see the broader narrative that God's teaching here. And then a couple last things, and we'll actually get to the story. Look for names and places. Anytime names and places are mentioned, they're important. Look for repeated language. Look for repeated language. Look for repeated language. Look for repeated, you'll see it. Words, and in fairness, our translations don't do a great job in this sometimes, but there are themes and words that constantly come back that it is the narrator trying to emphasize something. It's what one author refers to as invisible ink that helps us define and understand the whole story when certain phrases get repeated over and over. And then we're going to be looking for tension and conflict, because out of tension comes teachable moments. As characters' lives just move smoothly and perfect, there's very little teaching that comes out of that. But when tension and conflicts and struggles arise, and how they handle them or don't handle them is going to expose what is trying to be taught. All right, so there's enough groundwork. We're going to look at what I'm calling Act 1 of the story of Ruth, and it's chapter 1. And I encourage you, read Ruth over and over. Like, it's 4 chapters, it won't take long. Read the whole of the story. I'm not going to read verse by verse. We're going to walk through the story, and I'm going to re-narrate the narrator's story, if you will, as we go through this. But we're going to look at Act 1. The interesting component about Act 1, we know Ruth and Boaz become the primary characters in the story. But in Act 1, Naomi really is the primary character in Act 1. Ruth is there to support Elimelech, her sons, her other daughter-in-law are all a component of the story, but really Act 1 is primarily about Naomi. And this is the way it starts. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judea went to sojourn in a country of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. So it's a family story, right? Pretty simple so far. It lays out our location and our times. Hey, at the time of Judges, now let's put some context to that. Time of Judges where everybody did what was right in their own eyes. They weren't under the rule of a king. This is pre-David, not to pre-David. In fact, you find the book of Ruth nestled very neatly between Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd King. It fits there chronologically because it's at the tail end of the Judges where people are kind of doing whatever they wanted, but yet they haven't had a king yet. And we'll see that as we get towards the end of the book. A man decides to take his family to Moab from Bethlehem because of a famine. Why is this important? One, they're going to mention Moab, Moabite, and Bethlehem and Judea a ton in Act 1. And right, we're paying attention to names and places. What's important about Bethlehem? Bethlehem is part of the Promised Land. This is where the Jewish people are able to participate and be in communion with God. This is where their promises are fulfilled. This is where they get their blessing for being a part. In the Old Testament, communion with God happened in a location. In the New Testament, it happens through Jesus Christ. The geographic area is very important in the Old Testament. So this family chooses to leave Bethlehem and head to Moab. And you might go, big deal. Why is this a hang-up? Why is this important? This is very different than there's no work in the valley, so I'm going to commute to the Bay Area. Or there's no work in the valley, so we're going to move to North Dakota. Or there's no work here, we're going to go to Texas. Like that there's a simple logic and a simple understanding for that. There was some basic essential needs that were not being met because of the famine, and it would make sense that you would go to try to find food elsewhere. Moab isn't just elsewhere. Moab has been a rival enemy to the God of Israel for many years. You can go back through Deuteronomy, you can go back through the Judges, and you can see this would be, hey, there's no work in Ripon, we're going to move to an Islamic terrorist state to find work. This was an extreme move. It wasn't not as geographically different. So just for your geography, Bethlehem is on the north end of the Dead Sea, on the western side of the Dead Sea, northwest, and Moab is on the northeast side of the Dead Sea. So they reversed the path of the original those that were wandering in the wilderness, they would have came in, they would have crossed the Jordan, they would have entered in through Jericho, and they would have started taking the promised land. They're going back. They're going to go past Jericho. They're going to cross over the Jordan, and they are going to go into enemy territory because they feel they need to get, because of the famine. Walking away from their promise, walking away from their blessing. And here's the reality. It just doesn't go well. Okay, they go there as a family unit. Elimelech, Naomi, we have Chilion and Mahlon. Those are the sons. They all go as a family to Moab. They're there for quite a while. Both the sons find wives, Moabite wives, and then eventually, at some point, as you can see by my beautiful artwork here, I know it wasn't as pretty as the whale that was here last week. This is when I do my own artwork and not my daughter. All three males die. We're not told why. We're not told how. We don't dwell on that. This is just the reality. All three die. And this is a devastating tension point inside the story. Losing your husband, losing your sons would be a traumatic experience for anybody, leaving an empty, lonely feeling inside. There would be emotional tension and angst. I mean, but it's extreme. It's even more so for Naomi. They are in a male-dominant, male-led society. If you don't have a husband or a son to protect you and take care of you and provide for you, you are hopeless and lost. And this might be a place where some people get distracted about going, well, that's not right and that's not proper, and a woman... This is just to embrace the story and to understand the story. You have to realize the tension that this reality caused. They were destitute. They were hopeless. They had no way of generating income. They had no way of providing. And she is a foreigner in this land, and she has 2 daughter-in-laws. So Naomi decides that it's time to head back. In fact, it's even more so than just she decides that. It says, verse 6, and she arose with her daughters-in-laws to return from the country of Moab. Again, anytime they use Moab is listed over and over, and Bethlehem as well. Return from Moab, for she heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord visited his people and gave them food. So you're going to see a theme over and over, and this theme of fullness and emptiness and essential needs and desires is going to show up over and over. They left Bethlehem in search of food. Disaster hits, and they hear that food is now available back in Bethlehem. So she's at a crossroads. She decides to leave. She leaves with her daughter. I got a daughter-in-law. Ruth is obvious, but I always have to read Orpah. I won't roll my R's like the pronunciation said to on my computer. Orpah and Ruth leave with Naomi. And somewhere between Moab and Bethlehem, there becomes a decision to make. Naomi tries to convince Ruth and Orpah to go back to Moab. This is your home, this is your country, this is where you're familiar, you know the traditions, you know the holidays, you know everything about it, you know the language. Stay there. You have hope. You have future. You have the ability to marry again, to have kids. Naomi goes, I've got nothing for you. Because inside the law of Israel, what was supposed to happen is if a son died, the daughter-in-law, and there's no kids yet, is supposed to marry the next son in line. And Naomi's going, I'm an old lady. There's no way I'm going to have another kid. And even if I did have another kid, there's no way. You would then be an old lady before my son was old enough. Even if it happened tonight, it's not going to work. There's no hope for you in Bethlehem. One daughter decides to return back to Moab. And Ruth, in a covenant of kindness, in a commitment to her mother-in-law, says, I'm going to follow you. Your people will become my people. Your gods will become my gods. I am going to follow you. And this is some of the beauty that is seen inside the story of Ruth. They return back. The women of Bethlehem are talking. Is this Naomi who has returned? And Act 1 closes this way. I want you to catch this. Verse 21. Let's start at verse 20. Naomi speaking. She said to them, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Again, names and locations matter. For the Almighty has dealt with me very bitterly. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Naomi says, I left for Moab full. I had all these desires. I had all these dreams and plans and hopes in front of me. I left with my husband and my 2 sons, and we were going to go start with just the basic needs, food and water. And we had it all planned out. I went full, and the Lord returned empty. Returned me empty. So Naomi returned with Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law, and who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. There's some beautiful compare and contrast. They left Bethlehem because they needed food. They returned back to Bethlehem right at the beginning of the barley harvest. And we're sensing already a transition from Naomi at the end of Act 1 to Ruth as we go into Act 2. What does this part of the story mean to us? What does this relate to us personally? I'm going to give you a quick one, and then we're going to dive in a little bit on the second one. The quick one is, we do not want to get stuck in Moab. We want to return back to the promised land. We want to not be distracted and stuck by the things of this world that so easily entice and entangle. We want to be with Christ. Returning from the world to Christ can be a painful experience, but it's the only place hope will show. And the second one is, I want to talk to you about this concept of fullness versus emptiness. We're born with a certain level of desires and things that we need, basic food, water, why they chase for a famine, why a drought can destroy. But even broader than that, we are created in a way that we desire certain things. We also have a wider view, a wider need of greater things. Things like intimacy. And that's why we pursue them to get married or desire a happy marriage. We have usually a built-in desire to have kids. That we look for happy, healthy children once we're married. We have desire for joy and happiness, and that can be manifest in an amazing meal with our family. We have a desire for purpose and success. And I want to be careful. These aren't wrong desires. But sometimes they become disproportionate. Sometimes they become too big. The desire for not being hungry is great. Gluttony is bad. The desire for intimacy and sex is good. An affair is devastating. The desire for purpose and work is good. Abandoning your family and becoming a workaholic is bad. And what we want to break down and see here is Naomi and her husband left looking to fulfill some emptiness. Pretty basic. There was a famine. There was hunger. And God has brought them back. And the language Naomi uses here is very telling of where she is at, but not where God is at. She goes, I left full. I had a husband, I had sons, I had hope, I had desire, and God has brought me back empty. Her desires were were not appropriate for where she was getting them from. She was finding them exclusively in the world that she was in. And what we're going to see as we continue to push in, as we continue to explore the beauty of this story, is that we find true fullness, not in the things of this world, but in God and His plan for our lives. And so there's this tension moment right here. We're going to leave you a little bit on a cliffhanger where Naomi goes, I left full and I returned empty. And God is preparing Naomi and by extension Ruth for what His plans is for their life as He starts to unfold the rest of the story. A lot of us might be experiencing a lot of emptiness right now. There's, again, going back to the beginning of why is Ruth relevant? There is so much in the world that hurts. That from simple things like we had a family vacation planned. I was looking forward to going here, to I lost a loved one because of COVID, or I know somebody that has been abused or mistreated or discriminated against in that wound, or I have been discriminated against and that wound is ripped open fresh. There is so much emptiness right now. And God can use that. God can strip away those things that we were finding fulfillment in, but were never fully satisfying. That as we went to Moab, we felt full. And God may be stripping things back so that He can pour into us, that we can find our fullness in Him. The story isn't finished. This is only Act 1. We're going to continue. We're going to continue to see the beauty of Ruth, the kindness, the reality of Ruth going, I'm all in, Naomi. That moment for Naomi, she was hopeless. She was destitute. She had nothing. And Naomi goes, I'm all in. I'm leaving everything behind. I'm with you no matter what. That kindness is so poignant and beautiful. And again, as relevant today, the need to show kindness to those around us, to those that look and act, right? Naomi's a foreigner. Ruth is a foreigner. Naomi even says herself, this Moabite woman. So as we move into the rest of this week, do some soul searching. Where have you been trying to be filled, to find fullness that may have been distorted? And where might there be an opportunity to show kindness and beauty? Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you for this simple story that reminds us of who you are, that exposes us to the realities of who you are, your love for us. That you sent your Son to rescue us, to love us, to fulfill us, to show beauty to us. Help us to continue that on. Help us to be the church as we go out to do that to those that you place in front of us. Help us to meet people where they're at and point them to Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen.
Good morning, church. Welcome to Ripon Grace Online. We're happy you're joining us today for worship, and we're excited that we even get to worship in person this week. And so if you're watching this, maybe you're going to attend a service at some point, or maybe you are sticking it out at home for another week or however long, and we just want to continue offering this online option. So if you're feeling like you kind of want to hold out a little bit longer, or not too comfortable with how things are looking right now, then that's perfectly fine, and we want to continue to worship together here over this format and everything. So again, we're going to be singing 4 songs today. This is Amazing Grace, Great Are You, Lord, Yes I Will, and The Stand. So hopefully you'll participate along with us, you'll sing along, even though you're there and we're here. So bow with me as we pray and begin worshiping today. Lord, I thank you just for the opportunity to worship again. I thank you for your faithfulness, God, and even when things are rocky and things are scary, and maybe we have some doubts or we're unsure about some things, God, that you are constant, you are unchanging, and your love for us is just as amazing and faithful, God. We thank you. We thank you for the chance to worship, and in your name, amen. The power of sin and darkness, whose love is mighty and so much stronger, the King of glory, the King above all kings, who shakes the whole earth with holy thunder and leaves us breathless in awe and wonder. Above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that I say? What can I do but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you? So I'll walk upon salvation, your spirit of light in me, my life to declare your promise, my soul now to stand. So what can I say? What can I do but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you? So what can I say? What can I but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you? So I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, you surrendered all. I am is yours. So I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, you surrendered all. I am is yours. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. So what can I say? What can I do but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you? Oh God, I just thank you for just the truths that we can sing about, Lord, that when we're fearful or doubting, God, or even just unsure of what's going on, or even where to stand, God, that we know that we can stand on your truth, and that truly your word it is the only truth that matters, God. I pray that you would give us grace, God, as we work to give grace to others, and as we seek to empathize and to care and love, God, that you would teach us how to do that properly and in a godly way, Lord, that you would just continue setting us apart, God, that even through tough situations and tough times, that there is a way for us to love the way that you love. God, we just pray for your mercy and your grace. And we just thank you for the opportunity again to worship and the freedom that we have to be able to do this and to even put it on online and to go through technology and use it in that way, God. We just thank you for today and this opportunity. And we love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. We'll just start over. You ready?
Margaret.